Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining the Penn State 2025 Workforce Ed Conference hosted by Workforce Education and Development and Organizational Management, um, Organization Development and Change Program at the Penn State University. So this is an event sponsored by Penn State College of Ed, College of Office, of the Provost for Educational Equity and Penn State University Park Allocation Committee. So my name is Beiwen Sun. I'm currently a doctoral student in Workforce Education and Development Program at Penn State. So I will moderating today's session along with my colleague Jose, who is also a doctoral student at Penn State in Learning and Design Technology program. So we are excited to have you like for today's meeting by using Zoom platform. So at the end of the presentation, there will be Q&A session. So if you want a presenter to address your questions, please type in the chat box. And if you encounter any technical problems during the webinar, please let us know, like using the chat box. So our online master of professional study in organization development and change is designed for professionals who want to gain the skills and knowledge necessary to lead organizational change effectively. Additionally, we offer a resident PhD program in workforce ed and development with concentrations in human resources development and organization development. Since 2021, we have established the biannual free conference featuring experts from around the globe. Today, we are excited to present Quiet Leadership, Valuing Different Ways of Leading and Creating Innovation by Dr. Tojo Thatchenkery from George Mason University. For detailed overview of our speakers' achievement and contributions, please feel free to visit the conference website. You will find links and additional information about our speakers here. So now, without further ado, please join me in welcoming our speaker, Dr. Thatchenkery for today. So, Dr. Thatchenkery, you can start whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mervin. Appreciate your introduction, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending upon where you are time zone wise. Welcome to this session. I'm sure you'll get a PDF copy of this presentation after it's over if you're interested. Again, thank you, and let me get started. So my topic is quiet leadership, valuing different ways of leading and creating innovation. Let me go to the next slide. So the goals are, I want to explain the concept of quiet leadership and its relationship to innovation. Most of my research came out of Silicon Valley, the Bay Area in California, where a lot of innovations happen. So that is the foundation of this research. And I would like to show how quiet leadership is one of the most important qualities for recognizing in your organization. And then how do you recognize, value, and develop a quiet leadership in your organization? Those are the goals of the presentation. You can see some images here. They're all quiet leaders. You see the hidden figures, the movie. And the three women there, they were pioneers that helped NASA achieve a lot of its breakthroughs, and they were quiet leaders. Until the movie came out, very few people knew about them. The founders of Google, they are, now you will see someone else on the left of that picture, and that is Steve Jobs. So Steve Jobs would be an example of what you call, a charismatic leader, very visible leader. But many others are not that visible, but they create equal amount of innovation. The CEO of Google, Sundar Pichai, CEO of Microsoft, Satya Nadella. And in the Walt Disney, you will see the co-founders, the Roy Disney and Walt Disney. Now, on the day of inauguration of the park, Walt Disney, Roy Disney got out of the property and went into a boat and watched the inauguration from a distance. When people asked him, "How come you're not there?" He said, "Today is the day for my brother to shine." His brother was Walt Disney. So Roy Disney wanted to be in the background, even though he was very involved. That's a great example of what we call quiet leadership. People very creative, innovative, but they're not always looking for the limelight or the visibility. They're not bragging how great they are. So and there is a reason why this kind of leadership might be very useful. So let's look at some examples of this. Um, how many of you have been in a group in which the loudest and the most visible members of the group exerted the most influence in the group decision making? I'm sure if I were to ask you to raise your hands, if it were an in-person session, many of you would have raised your hand. How many of you been in a group in which the most silent and the invisible person was the most knowledgeable member of the group and perhaps had the most relevant input and wisdom that would have benefited the group? I'm sure your answer would be yes, you were there in such a group. I know I have been in such a group. How many of you have been in situations in which you held a perspective that you knew was very important but was not listened to because a very few powerful people drowned out your voice? Again, many people will raise their hand. I can see a few people raising their hand in Zoom. That's it. That's a good way to know. Nice to know that. And this is what we mean by quiet leadership. That you did not experience quiet leadership in those examples. So the three questions point directly to a phenomenon we are discussing today called quiet leadership. It's one of the greatest challenges, that how do we create a culture in which we are able to understand, appreciate, and tap into the wisdom and perspective of those who may have valuable knowledge, but we don't hear about them. So this is a constant challenge. If you are a manager, vice president, director, CEO, any kind of leadership positions, team leader, you always have this dilemma. There are some people who are very visible, and some of them have good ideas, but many of them just like to talk. No matter where they are, they love to talk. They are visible. And then there are people who are quiet, but their ideas are great, but they don't get to speak. Now, you have a choice at that point. If you're a leader, do I ask them to speak? If you don't, then you don't hear that. But the folks who are very visible, constantly speaking, you'll have to find a way to slow them down so that the people who have good ideas can also speak. And I'll get more examples in a minute. Nelson Mandela gave a good example of quiet leadership in his famous book, his autobiography. Many of you might have read that, Long Walk to Freedom, a classic autobiography. And he mentioned his definition of leadership. Nelson Mandela's definition of leadership is this. He says that a leader is like a shepherd. He stays behind the flock, letting the most nimble go out ahead, whereupon others follow, not realizing all along that they are being directed from behind. I thought that's a beautiful example of, quiet leadership. That the leader is not always in the front; he or she may be behind, but without that person, things will not happen. But that individual is not craving for attention, visibility, or bragging rights. That is what quiet leadership is. And we found that that is very important in many organizations where innovations is critical. Another example, in the Japanese tradition, the master Yoshi Aida talked about a good example of quiet leadership. So he says that in a kabuki theater, there is a gesture that the actor makes. So basically, the person, this is again, remember, it's theater, okay? You're actually seeing what Yoshi Ueda does. So he will point to the moon, and where the actor points into the sky with his index finger. One actor who was very talented performed the gesture with grace and elegance. The audience thought, oh, this moment is so beautiful. They enjoyed the beauty of his performance, and the technical mastery he displayed. Another actor made the same gesture, pointing to the moon. The audience didn't notice whether or not he moved elegantly, but they saw the moon. And that was what was most important, seeing the moon. So it was not about the actor, it's really about seeing the moon. So you can see the difference between the two styles of leadership. And likewise, another example, he says, this is like 2000 years ago, as for the best leaders, the people who do not, to move this a bit so that I can read the whole thing, people who do not notice their existence, that's the best leaders. The next best, basically saying the best leaders are that you don't even notice them. The next best, people honor and you praise them. After that comes people who you fear, and then comes people you hate. When the best leaders' work is done, people will say, we did it ourselves. That's beautiful, right? You can see this range of leaders. People who you are afraid of as leaders, and then on the other extreme, you got people who are brilliant, but you don't even notice them. And in some cases, the followers or the team leaders or team members say, oh, we did it ourselves, without realizing, just like Nelson Mandela mentioned, they were being led from behind. So the whole thing is that a quiet leader doesn't ask what I can achieve, but what can we achieve? It's always the we, not the I. The I gets out of the way because it is graciously inferior to some greater vision. So this is this whole idea about managing between the I and the we to a large extent. So how did I come upon the quiet leadership? What is the reason I'm talking about all of this? Well, as I was working on my one of the books I wrote with Carol Metzger, a graduate of our program called Appreciative Intelligence, Seeing the Mighty Oak in the Acorn, we were looking at Silicon Valley and wanted to find out what is the reason you have so much innovation coming from a tiny area in United States. When you think about the whole geography, you go into Google Map and type in Palo Alto, you'll see a small place south of San Francisco. You'll see Stanford University there, the whole Bay Area, etc. Now, from that place came most of the innovations we see today, starting with what we call the garage culture. You had Apple was founded there in a garage by Steve Jobs and other Steve. And then Hewlett Packard or HP was also founded there. So if you go to Palo Alto, you'll see two townhouses. The original townhouses were Steve Jobs founded the company in a garage, and also Hewlett Packard. The two folks founded HP in a garage. That's sort of the history. And then came a lot of other companies. You got Google and Microsoft and Apple, and they're all there. Even Meta, or earlier the Facebook, which began in Boston area, they moved to California in that area. So I started asking myself, what is unique about this area? What is special about this place called the Bay Area? How is it different from other parts of United States? For example, you have what we call the East Coast Boston area. You have Harvard and MIT, two historical universities. Of course, innovations come from there, but you don't see, if you look at the number of innovations, especially the one you're experiencing, the so-called the Internet of Things, the information technology revolution, that came from one small area, called the Silicon Valley. That's what people use, Silicon Valley, but it's basically the Palo Alto area. Now, I found that there you had a different kind of leadership culture there. In those organizations, there is a value about what you can do, not so much how much you talk about how great you are. So we found that there was high ethnic and diversity there, intellectual capital, highly developed capacity to value people across multiple forms of diversity, which I call appreciative intelligence. So it says something about this culture in Silicon Valley. I found that they value a different kind of leadership there. So when you look at these organizations, you find that the culture is what I call a doing culture. You're valued for what you can do. Can you write, program? Are you good in AI, artificial intelligence, or various other things? It's not so much about your charisma and your capacity to talk. So the leaders who are not talking a lot, or employees who are not speaking too much, but who know the work, were valued there. So the leadership in those organizations were mostly what I call quiet leadership. And I found that if quiet leadership is behind all this innovation, how come we don't practice that? How come we're not talking about that in rest of the in a country? In fact, when you think about the leadership module of any Fortune 500 company, most of them will have the opposite of quiet leadership. They will talk about how to be proactive and how to be visible, how to persuade people, and all other kind of things will be the focus. There will be no discussion on quiet leadership, even though we know that quiet leadership is what you need for innovation. So studies have shown that most leaders in Silicon Valley firms are highly what I call job focused, and meaning that they want to get the job done and practice what I call quiet leadership. And this quiet leadership has been very effective in many other parts of the world, like Europe, India, China, Africa, and other places. So it is not that it is not there. It's just that in US, United States, we have a different definition of what leadership is. In Europe, for example, people, I remember talking to folks in Finland when I was visiting there. They say, Americans brag too much. When I said, well, let's have an individual contributor. Let's find, let's give an award to the best contributor in the field and in the team. And they said, we don't have an individual person we want to highlight. We want to highlight the whole team, the whole group. So this whole focus on individual is very cultural. It is what is called internal locus of control. Those who know psychology know these two concepts called internal locus of control and external locus of control. Internal locus of control means that you are responsible for your future or your life. Whatever has happened is because of you, what we call high individualism. External locus of control means you believe that you are who you are because of other people. You became successful not just because you're so smart, but because other people were there to support you. It's almost like saying it takes a village, that you as a human being is flourishing because you are surrounded by people who support you in what you do. And that is what is called external locus of control. So United States is very heavily internal locus of control. Therefore, we believe that leadership is all about me, I, and how great am I, as opposed to how great the team is. So as you can see, we are number one. And when I say we, the US is number one in individualism out of the 50 countries researched by many multicultural research folks. And our definition is the hero is the leader. That is the cultural archetype. He is the hero as the leader. And the critical factors for success in the workplace are being aggressive, tooting your own horn, taking risk, getting visible. Those are the things that are valued. So benefiting the collective is not valued as highly as the success of the individual contributor. So the driving force behind successful leadership is the individual in United States. This contradicts with a lot of other places where the work ethic is about remaining invisible. That the goal of a worker or a manager is not to be visible, but to get the job done. And so you can see this. If you ask people, senior managers in the United States, can you tell me the qualities of successful leadership? They will say things like, proactive, which is the same as aggressive, take risk, visible, and get things done, and so on. Now, compare that with the opposite here. So a couple of books I wanted to mention. One is written by Laura Liswood. It says, The Loudest Duck. It says that, basically the question is, we want to compare and contrast the invisible and visible style of leadership. So the loudest duck says moving beyond diversity while embracing differences to achieve success at work. So the Chinese parable is the loudest duck gets shot. So if you're too visible, you get shot. Okay, so don't stand out. That's not good for you. But the American phrase is the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So if you don't complain, you're not going anywhere. So keep talking about how good you are and keep asking for more. No, otherwise nobody is going to give it to you. So these differences in cultural values translate into different modes of leadership. It's very, very critical. I remember going to observe my daughter in when she was in elementary school in Fairfax County. There is something called Teachers' Day. So I went there and you observe the teacher and the kids and so on. So the teacher was asking again, I remember it, she was in elementary school, some math problem, and she asked, like, who knows the answer? Lot of hands went up instantly, and they were all white boys, young white boys. And then the teacher said, okay, Joni, what is the answer? With his hand raised, he said, I don't know. So he raised his hand, but he didn't know the answer, but he proudly said, I don't know. But the interesting thing was raising hands was instinctive. It was almost like inbuilt in him. And then I looked at people who did not raise their hands. And there were many Asian girls there, and there was one girl in particular from China, or at least Chinese, ethnicity. And so the teacher asked her, Jen, do you know the answer? She knew the answer, but she did not raise her hand. So I wondered, what is the reason she did not raise her hand, even though she knew the answer? I knew it has something to do with that loudest duck metaphor, that it gets shot, or something about don't be too visible. In Indian culture, we have this notion called karma. Karma means do your duty, rewards will come to you. Don't seek reward, always do your duty. And that is called karma, K-A-R-M-A. It's a Sanskrit word. So this whole thing about duty versus reward is a cultural phenomenon. That the assumption that if you do your work, rewards will come, versus do your work and make sure you get rewarded. See, these are two different approaches. And another book, this became a bestseller by Susan Cain. The title of the book is Quiet, The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't, shut up or stop talking. So that book became very popular. And then another one called The Introverted Leader, Building on Your Quiet Strength. There are sort of, viewpoints saying that the quiet leadership is equally important. This is not to say that the other kind of leadership is not important, but to say that we have to value this leadership as well. Okay, moving on. So what is quiet leadership? I think I've talked enough, but you probably understand this by now. It's a style of leadership where the leader takes a full brunt of failure, but shies away from the sunshine. Just moving the slides a little bit, of success, handing over the glory to team members. And this is it. The leader, if something goes wrong, the leader takes the blame. But if things are great, you don't always want the glory to yourself. You want to give it to your team members. Believing that success belongs to the whole and not to one individual. Therefore, the whole should benefit and the success is mutually owned. So it is a collective phenomenon as opposed to something that only you are able to claim for yourself. Okay. What quiet leadership is not? It is not the same as being a quiet person. So I'm not saying that you ought to be quiet in organization. That's not really what I'm saying. It is not the same as being a quiet person. A gregarious person can be a quiet leader. It's just about, do you want the visibility to yourself or you want the visibility to your team? So the quiet leaders are respected and have a reputation for high integrity and getting things done. So when I have interviewed these leaders in Silicon Valley firms, people know them. They'll always say, oh, have you talked to him? Have you talked to her? So I hear from many people about this one individual, man or woman, and when I meet him or her, it turns out to be a very humble person. So I developed this expectation. I'm going to meet this charismatic, probably overbearing and sort of influential person, and who will just talk at me and things like that. But to my surprise, I found someone who is a good listener, rather quiet, humble, but they were highly respected across the organization. They were not famous outside the organization, but within the organization, they were highly respected. So that is a piece I found interesting. So the significance of quiet leadership, I think I mentioned this already, that I looked at the difference between what I call Route 128. That is the Boston. If you look at the map of Boston, you have this circle, highway that's called 128. And then there is a Silicon Valley, south of San Francisco, about 30 miles south. So what we call the Route 128 is a conformist culture, relatively homogeneous, very top universities like Harvard, MIT, this whole thing called Boston Brahmin, meaning that it is a lot of culture there, a lot of old money, and things are a bit conservative there. And then there is Silicon Valley. If you go there, you find high ethnic diversity. People from all around the world. You see Chinese Americans, Korean Americans, and Bangladesh, and Pakistan, India, Japanese, and Korean and European and American. I mean, everyone. South America. You see a lot of diversity. If you go to Stanford campus, you find people, in a bicycle and just going around, and they may be a multi-billionaire, owner of a company, but you never see them by looking at them. There's hardly any hierarchy you observe there. So that's what I found interesting about that place. There was a lot of self-expression and creativity for their own, sake, and that's what I found in Silicon Valley. So that is how this concept of appreciative intelligence was developed, written by Carol Metzger and I, graduate of our OD&C program. And we say that appreciative intelligence is the ability to reframe a situation and to recognize the possibilities embedded in it, but not initially apparent. So the reason I'm mentioning appreciative intelligence is that I found that quiet leaders have high amount of appreciative intelligence. So they are very good in reframing and seeing things differently. That is where the innovation comes. So a quality of quiet leaders is high appreciative intelligence. Some of them was also high on emotional intelligence, but not all of them. But they were all high on appreciative intelligence, the quiet leaders. They had an ability to perceive the positive potential in a situation and to act purposively to transform that potential to outcomes. And they will act on it. So it's not just reframing and seeing the positive. They will also look at what I need to do to make things happen. Now, so that was one quality of quiet leaders, appreciative intelligence, the capacity, just going back to that, reframe. So I found that when they're facing a challenge in organization, they reframe. Think about the founders of Uber and Airbnb and all that. If you look at the history of how Uber started, one of the founders was in Paris. It was some big event going on, and he couldn't find a taxi that day, and everything was taken. So he asked himself, wouldn't it be nice if he could, if people could use their own car and pick up people? So that was a reframing, but he was a quiet leader. Not many people have heard about him. So I find that a lot of innovation came from leaders who are not very visible or very charismatic. They were quiet leaders. Airbnb is another example. But then you have examples of very visible leaders like Apple. Like, of course, it's an example of that. And but again, Microsoft, very good example. And Bill Gates was known, but the current CEO, Satya Nadella, is a very, very humble person. His style of leadership is remarkably quiet. Same goes for Sundar Pichai and many other people. So I just wanted to highlight that. And now let's go back to the core elements of quiet leadership. So one is collaboration. And that is their drive towards consensus. They believe in teamwork, and they believe that leading is done through facilitation versus direction. So it is not so much about telling people what to do, but more about collaboration and working together. And the other thing is a long-term focus. That is, develop leaders at all levels. manage to the future as opposed to managing to get things done. Substance driven versus instant gratification. So now you know that the Wall Street culture is all based on quarterly results and so on. So if you don't produce results, you're down. But I found that the quiet leaders have a capacity to look at the long term, and then more about they're also very high on rewarding the whole. That is recognizing the team as opposed to the individual, and they emphasize meritocracy rather than a star leadership culture. That's very important. Recognize meritocracy as opposed to being a star. Let me see if I have that. Yeah, it's coming there. Yeah. So there is a subtlety about these quiet leaders that they have, they do have a desire for visibility, but not for the sake of themselves. They want the visibility for their organization, their team. So they want, what they really want is visible outcomes, concrete results, and the contribution of their leadership. So they want to produce services and products that people will use and value. And think about the Chat GPT, the whole open AI. I mean, some of the people are totally unknown, but they created a revolution, right? By talking about artificial intelligence, and the active players of ChatGPT is really not known. They are really quiet leaders. So this is where this two kind of leadership comes into play. Now, historically, United States built its leadership in innovation and entrepreneurship by being a doing culture and by practicing what I call doing leadership. Think about time from the Second World War. Think about 1940s, 1945, that time period. There was an industrial military complex and all those things, because we were in the middle of the Second World War, a lot of production were going on. Now, that was a great time for what we call doing leadership. Parents were proud to say that my son worked for IBM or General Motors or GM or Ford or GE, and my son is an engineer. Those days, a lot of people say, boys went to college and not as much as women. Now it has changed. So they would say, yeah, my son is an engineer. They took a lot of pride in saying that. Now, what did those engineers do? They produced things. They produced products and services. They built automobiles, planes, Boeing, and send someone to the moon. So all these outcomes is what we call doing. That was the culture, the doing culture. Gradually, there was a shift. The pendulum has now swung to the other side, where we have become, when I say we, the United States has become what I call a showing culture. That is, the leaders are preoccupied in the showing mode. So whenever the quarterly results are released, some of these leaders will go on CNBC and talk up their company, talk about how great they are and so on. But the whole focus on showing that you are good has had consequences. Think about what has happened as a result of this. A lot of innovation is now happening outside the United States because we are so focused on being the showing leader mode as opposed to the doing mode. Now, some examples are China and India are thriving being in the doing mode. China is the world's leading patent filer. If you look at the number of patents filed, they are leading across the world. Now, in India, I observed the same thing, that a lot of focus on doing, getting things done, as opposed to in the showing mode. Now, as a result, you find that by outsourcing innovation to outside the US, you go to Bangalore, New Delhi, Gurgaon, Hyderabad, and places like that, you will see a Microsoft and Google and Pfizer and AstraZeneca, all these big companies, research and development happening there. Not just, I'm not talking about call centers. Those are the long, old model. I'm talking about research and development centers outside the US, especially in Asia. That is showing the shift from doing to the showing, because we want to, when I say we, the US corporations want to look good as opposed to do the good. By that, I mean The innovation is really happening outside because it is cheaper to do it outside. It's not that they don't value it, but they find that economically you can get it done better outside. So what would happen long term? You will start losing your innovation capabilities because you're not in the doing mode anymore. So all these new things come out outside of US suddenly because there was a shift to kind of let somebody else who can do it more cheap do it. And this consequence is rather significant. It's some people have observed it, so they say, well, we want to come back to the doing culture. We want to bring back our the industries back to the US and start producing things like we have always done instead of asking somebody else to do it. Let's focus more on making results or showing results as opposed to saying that we have got good results. So this is the critical reason why quiet leadership is important. If a country or an organization needs to be innovative, they must have a quiet leadership. It's not enough just to say the doing leadership. And this is where one of my books, co-written by another graduate of the program, Kame Sugiyama. She's now a professor in a university in Wisconsin. So she and I collaborated on this, and we wrote this book called Making the Invisible Visible, Understanding Leadership Contributions of Asian Minorities in the Workplace, Palgrave Macmillan. So we did research and talked to a large number of leaders, and we found that many of them were Asian Americans. And so the challenge was, how do you make their contributions visible? We were not, the Asian Americans, just as an example, I'm not just focusing only on Asian Americans, but saying that Asian Americans is a good example of invisible or quiet leadership. They did a lot, but they didn't get the visibility they needed because they were in that paradigm of, the loudest duck gets shot, that I don't want visibility. I want to do my job. I will be rewarded if I am good. The karma, do your duty is what they wanted. So it became important that if you are a leader, if you are a vice president or someone in that level, you're going to recognize these quiet leaders and bring them up because they're not going to take the initiative to come up. Another example of a quiet leader is Mohammed Yunus. Now he is the Prime Minister of Bangladesh, but he got the Nobel Peace Prize in 2006. What was his contribution? Microcredit. So this whole concept of microcredit and Grameen Bank, he developed it. He was an economist. He was trained in the US. He went back to Bangladesh, and he created this transformational financial product called microcredit. Now, a lot of other countries in the world now do this. And he was a quiet leader. He didn't get a lot of visibility. He didn't seek it either. Another famous example is a person by the name Sridharan, who created what we call the famous Delhi metro example. And I want to give that Delhi example because I studied in Delhi before I came to US. I was in Delhi for 10 years doing my undergrad and graduate degrees, and then I taught in a business school, Faculty of Management Studies, for a couple of years before I came to the US to do my PhD. So I know Delhi very well, and I could never believe that somebody could build a metro in New Delhi. Now, those of you who have seen New Delhi, been there, maybe 10 years ago, if you've gone there, you'd see that it's very crowded, and you have to have underground. So how do you create underground when things are so congested? And it was never thought about to have a metro. And people said you can never have a metro in Delhi. But this man, Sridharan, he's 80, 89 now. And I interviewed him about 3 months ago, still very sharp person and very humble. But he is a genius and a good example of what I call a quiet leader. And there he has been a consultant in so many countries for creating metro systems. And so the key is that he's an engineer above that anything else. He's a doing leader as opposed to a showing leader. He doesn't give interviews. He doesn't want to be visible. He doesn't brag about. People write about him. He doesn't write about himself. He doesn't write a biography, autobiography, or anything like that. So what is the business case for developing quiet leadership now? So that's what I want to talk about. That in the end, I'm coming close to my end, and I want to leave about 15 minutes for question and answers. So there is a business case for developing a quiet leadership. I don't want you to say, I don't want you to think, or I don't want to plead that, and let's have quiet leadership because it's nice. No, there is a business case for quiet leadership. It's important for business. If you ask the question, how can my organization become an innovation leader, then you have to think about quiet leadership. You have to ask about that kind of leadership. How can you create new activities and services and, and fulfill the mission of your organization? And this is really what every leader in any organization will be thinking about. How can I be an innovation leader? Right? No matter how successful you are, you got to keep doing more and more. Otherwise, you are left behind. So it's not good enough. Think about Google and Apple and Microsoft and Meta and IBM and General Motors and all these companies. They're very good, but they don't want to. They know that if they don't continue to innovate, they will not. They will stagnate. Somebody else will take over. So this constant desire to innovate is there in every organization. So now our research shows, and based on my book and other things, that one area that you can make a big difference is if we can develop our quiet leaders and acknowledge and appreciate and reward them, you are likely to do better. Now, in the 1990s, when internet boom or IT was really flourishing, a lot of these people left these big corporations like IBM, etc., and founded small companies. They were called startups. So they left. So there is always the possibility that a quiet leader who is highly innovative, not recognized, will leave. And that's a loss for the company. They'll always find something else, but it's a loss for the company. And so, how do you do this? I say you start with an appreciative inquiry. So, those of you who are familiar with OD will know what an appreciative inquiry is. I'm not discussing it here, but it's basically a way of looking at what works in an organization. So, the action steps I would recommend are create an intentional strategy to see positive value in multiple styles of leadership, including quiet leadership. And it's important I say multiple. So I'm not arguing for only one type of leadership. That will not work either. You got to value multiple styles. There will be leaders who are charismatic. There will be leaders who want visibility, and they are doing good work as well. You have to recognize them, and in fact, they will make sure they are recognized because that's their style. The very style they have is about being recognized, but they also do good work. Not all of them, but some of them. But you do have to value that. So this is not a call for giving up on that. I'm saying that when you design a leadership development program, think about multiple styles of leadership. Expose the participants to multiple styles of leadership in your training program, and then redefine what leadership means within your organization. And what is leadership? You got to define that. What now? Are we looking for a certain type of people, or are we looking for different type of people? Now, research shows that there is no one style of leadership good for a given company. In the same organization, multiple leadership styles are required. What research and development needs is a different kind of leadership than marketing. If you are in finance, if you are in the Wall Street, that's generally supposed to be quiet leadership. But if you are in sales, you got to be visible. If you are in accounting, it's a different type. So you got to think about different styles of leadership in the same organization. And one of them should be what I call the quiet leadership. Create a concrete action plan to seek out and recognize differences in leadership styles in your organization. I've already mentioned that. So you cannot afford not to do it. That's the whole point, that if you have to be innovative, you got to really go for that. And you can measure the human and social capital component in the curriculum of leadership development you've got, and your onboarding. By socialization, I meant onboarding. Onboarding is the best example to know what style of leadership a company values. Just look at the onboarding program, whether it is virtual. These days, many companies do it virtual or in person. And see, you can look at the content of an onboarding program and see what kind of leadership they value. Do they value quiet leadership as well? Think about that. And and other action step that you can think about. So that's sort of, my question. So that is it. So now we are at Q&A session, exactly 15 minutes left on the clock for question and answers.
Thank you, Dr. Tojo, and for your informative talk around quiet leadership and suggesting like a possible action plans for future study. So now we're gonna move to Q&A session. So you can feel free, like all the audiences can feel free to drop in your questions in the chat box. But now we have one question here. So the question is asking, Dr. Tojo, could you please discuss and construct like a contrast what you learn from Silicon Valley within what we hear through the media about oligarchy, bro culture, and brotocracy?
Sure. The recent developments that you are observing in our political space is very different. This is not something I had thought about, I had anticipated. So I should say that I see this as more of a temporary phenomenon. Historically speaking, in the information technology, leaders in Silicon Valley were very much focusing on diversity and equity, and they really valued differences and so on. That was the culture all along. So the shift you have seen among some leaders is rather surprising, and I'm hoping that it will only be a temporary phenomenon, because history doesn't suggest that it will stay like that for very long.
Thank you, Dr. Tojo, and hope Dr. Tojo answer this questions from one of our audiences. And any other questions? Yeah, any other questions? Yeah, so as we still have time, probably I have a question to ask Dr. Tojo, and I just wonder, I mean, what is your like future plans around this topic?
Sure, I am continuing to work on this. Of late, I have started working on a book. We just got a book contract from Wiley Business with a partner of mine in Finland to work on a leadership book on what we call circular economy. Circular economy is, let me just adjust this a little bit. I think maybe I should go back a little bit here to be on camera. Circular economy is this practice of designing things that can be lasted a lot longer than just throwing it in the recycling bin. So it is a design principle, and we found that a lot of startups in that space, it's connected to sustainability, etc. But circular economy means a system of production and a system of services where things are used multiple times. And we found that the startups are doing very innovative work, and many of them are quiet leaders again. They are not looking for visibility. So we are writing a leadership book about leaders in circular economy, and I find that they are examples of quiet leaders. So it is in a way a continuation of our work in quiet leadership to a new area called the circular economy. Thank you for that question.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Tojo. And I think so it's more like a time to wrap up for like this session. And thank you, Dr. Tojo again, and thank you everyone for joining today's session. And on behalf of the conference organizers, we hope you enjoyed today's session. And please feel free to email us or contact the person directly. And yeah, I think yeah, that's pretty much today's session. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for coming, and thank you for listening, and thanks to Piven and Jose for organizing it.
Yeah, thank you, and have a great rest of your day.
All of you, thank you.
Thank you.